This is Luke Paulson, the Catholic Conservative, and welcome to the news of the week for December 13th, 2025. And if you enjoy these videos, do not forget to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe for more. The military versus the president. After the seditious six posted their viral video telling troops to turn down unlawful orders, even though the same six could not name any unlawful orders, they were denounced by Republicans and cheered on by Democrats. Republicans were forced to define sedition as denying lawful orders. Recall that since no unlawful orders were given, denying the orders is sedition. However, since these lawmakers got no pushback in their own party, Senator Mark Warner took it a step further. He said that the military could be used to stop this administration. Here is Senator Warner in his own words.
And I think in many ways, the uniformed military may help save us from this president and his lame people like Hegseth, because I think their commitment is to the Constitution and obviously not to Trump, and I expect Bradley to adhere to that.
Is there really any other way to see this quote? If President Donald Trump really was a fascist, Senator Warner would already be in a pine box. The fact that a legislator can say this is proof that we still live in a republic. Recall that this is how it started.
If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome.
Then, because there was no pushback from party leadership, they just got worse and worse.
I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind, and you will pay the price.
And somehow Republicans are the violent ones. Now I severely doubt that the military will turn on the commander-in-chief, especially since he has been so successful, even if Democrats do not want him to succeed. Double-tapped vote. ABC is a member of the fake news. However, they finally got something right.
Why, even a broken clock is right 2 or 3 times a day.
Democrats who were in full denial that Antifa even existed decided that the drug boats did not exist either. They decided that the drones following these boats were not actually seeing drugs being loaded to smuggle into America. Now ABC has finally admitted something that vindicated President Trump. The drug smugglers who had their boat blown to smithereens by a Hellfire missile tried to get back on the boat to save the drugs. Then they were double-tapped and immediately stood before the judgment seat. In other words, President Trump was right. Again. Now when it comes to the so-called fisherman who was blown up, he was not a good guy. He was in and out of prison and was involved in drug trafficking. Our drones are top of the line with amazing cameras. It is very easy to tell the difference between a drug boat and a fishing boat. Unless you are a liberal. Now the same people who said that the Maryland man was harmless, even going so far as to visit him in prison in South America, are calling these drug boats fishing boats. The fake news does not have a stellar track record in recognizing terrorists. They are apparently also not good at recognizing fraud. A request turned down. President Trump made a very simple request. Provide data about the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, benefits, so that the administration could look for corruption. About half of the country responded, and even out of that, thousands upon thousands of fraud cases were found. I suspect that there are scores more in the blue states that did not hand over the data. Skip forward to the present, and the Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, is threatening to cut SNAP benefits for states that did not contribute their numbers. The states could just contribute the information, but instead of that, they will just take it to court and use lawfare tactics. All these people had to do was send in the data. Why did they not send in the information?
Well, the way I see it, there are 3 possibilities.
1. They are suffering from Trump derangement syndrome and thus do not trust their president. 2. They do not have the data and thus spend the money willy-nilly. 3. They are hiding massive corruption that cannot be discovered. Whichever one it is, the Democrats should just hand over the data and be done with it. The Democrats may not want to hand this information over for the same reason that they want illegals on the census. Only counting Americans. The census is one of the very few explicit powers under the Constitution. You cannot have a representative republic without knowing where people are. If people are fleeing third world California for first world Texas, that makes a difference. I have a number of problems with how the census is performed, as it is a game of 20 questions that has nothing to do with population distribution. Why does the census need to know ethnic distribution or what your living conditions are? The only reason that exists is to make gerrymandering easier, or just the classic divide Americans against one another routine. Now on to the topic at hand. President Trump is trying to eliminate counting the illegals on the census. I cannot imagine why they would need to be counted. They cannot legally vote, unless Democrats are willing to admit that the illegals do vote, and thus they do not need to be represented. American representation is for Americans. Whether they should be here or not is another issue, but since they are illegal and do not vote, and should not get benefits, they can just deal with how Americans choose to vote. If you are a guest in someone's home, you do not get a say in how they do things. And if you do not like it, you can walk out the door. It is the same with America, with immigrants and illegals acting as disgruntled guests. As mentioned a moment ago, they should not even be here. Donations to a racist. It is no secret that those who would resort to lying or theft would have a weaker moral compass. If you look at the top of the screen, you can see how much money has been stolen on average per Somali in the St. Paul area, in Minnesota, and in the United States as a whole. I include that last one for scale, and because no doubt they are trying this all over the country, maybe even in Wisconsin, where a confrontation took place. While one of these Somalis was at a Cinnabon, she told the worker there that she was dressed immodestly. I watched the footage very closely, and I did not see what she was talking about. This eventually resulted in a heated exchange, which led to the worker, Crystal Wilsey, being fired. A Give Send Go was set up on her behalf, and as of the writing of this script has amassed over $100,000. The Overton window has shifted, and now people really do not care so much about being called the R word. After all, we were called Nazis and fascists by Nazis and fascists for the better part of a decade. However, Tim Walz is practically in tears after being called retarded. Now let us go from those of us who protect the victims to those who protect the criminals. The J.A.I.L Act. The Judicial Accountability for Irresponsible Leniency Act, also known as the J.A.I.L Act, is going through the House. On a side note, how did they come up with these names? After countless judges and prosecutors, not all of them financed by George Soros, let dangerous and murder-bound criminals back onto the street, who then go on to murder more people, the judges go back home while families are ripped apart. This act would hold those judges accountable for their actions. I say that it is about time for this. A bartender can be held legally accountable for serving drinks to an intoxicated person, but a judge somehow cannot be held accountable for letting these thugs back into our communities. While this bill goes back to September, I am just now finding out about it, which just goes to show how much chaos is going on in this country released by the Democrats. This is what happens with the party of chaos and criminals. The Democrats are more than happy with criminals running free, especially if they work for white-collar criminals. Health care money to the people. The so-called Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, is a joke. It raised costs and forced people to buy services that they did not want. It forced people to buy things that they found to be sinful despite lawsuits. And it amounted to a massive money laundering scheme. The program gave massive subsidies to insurance companies, who would then fund the campaigns of the Democrats who gave them money. A debate on the Obamacare subsidies was part of the deal to reopen the government after the Schumer shutdown. A Republican bill endorsed by President Trump has found a solution that should satisfy everyone. Instead of giving money to the insurance companies, people can have $1,000 in a health savings account. The beauty is that this cannot be used for hair or nails like some forms of food stamps. However, it is still a subsidy and thus a problem. Granted, it is a problem for the same reason that fire is dangerous. Being ignorant of a candle is dangerous. But being ignorant of a campfire is even more dangerous. It all comes down to the lesser of two evils. Ideally, people would not be taxed as much, and they could then do with their own money as they saw fit. Now, the real question is who gets the money? Also, is there any oversight? As such, let us talk about tariffs and subsidies. Trump farm subsidies. President Trump is giving farmers $12 billion in subsidies to offset tariffs.
Sounds like a great idea. With the best of intentions, what could possibly go wrong?
I am not going to argue that things are easy for farmers lately, and thus hard for everyone else as a result. When farmers and the oil industry are hit hard, all of us have to pay more as a result. However, as I mentioned in the transition, not one liberal who is now decrying tariffs despite previously being the party of tariffs is bringing up Bidenflation, which brought up prices on everything. I do not think that subsidies are going to help because they will not only cause more inflation, but subsidies are ripe for corruption and abuse. However, no matter how bad things get. Even if America completely falls apart. I'm just passing through on my journey to God's kingdom. As such, let us discuss Monday's holiday. Trump celebrates Mary.
Catholic Church teaches Mary was immaculately conceived. What does that mean? That means her mother didn't sin either. So Mary started off life, never sinned.
This is what a lot of Protestants think the Immaculate Conception, which we Catholics celebrate each December, is. In actuality, it teaches that the blood of Jesus was applied to Mary preemptively, so that she could be the perfect vessel for Jesus. Or in much simpler terms, Mary was conceived without original sin. It was not too long ago that President Trump celebrated the demonic so-called holiday of Diwali, in which some people also celebrate by throwing cow poop at each other, but now he celebrated the yes of Mary. Because of her affirmative, we can have life everlasting. I can attribute Diwali to being politically correct and keeping peace with the Second Lady, but Catholicism is not exactly politically correct these days. As such, I will celebrate the things that President Trump does right, while condemning the things that he does wrong. Unlike Democrats with Trump derangement syndrome, who just think that everything that President Trump does is immoral and evil. One thing that they hate most is that President Trump stands up for the truth, something that the so-called party of science rejects. Even with things as obvious as biological differences, a simple name change, truth cannot and must not be compromised. If truth becomes compromised, it is no longer the truth. The Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS, has changed the nameplate under the portrait of a certain individual to reflect the biological name of Richard Levine. If the HHS is going to represent science, all records need to reflect observable, testable, empirical, and repeatable evidence. If any record is absent of these, it is not scientific and thus has no place in the medical profession. Meanwhile, while states like Georgia have been ordered to continue this care for prisoners so that certain people do not have to go to certain prisons, President Trump has ordered that there will be no men housed in women's prisons. It has been said that there will be more if this goes through, but we have already seen too many female prisoners get pregnant by these same people. As such, I do not care. We need to support the scientific method, something that the so-called party of science rejects.
Maybe I'm just blowing smoke. Maybe I'm completely off my rocker, but that is just my opinion. And do not forget to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe for more. But before you go, on the left I have last week's video, but you may also enjoy the video on the right.